Welcome back. If you've just joined us, you're watching the news at 10 on Channels Television, coming to you live from Lagos. Now, here in Lagos, the heavy rains did not stop Muslims from participating in the Eid prayers. Thousands came out early enough to observe the prayers at various mosques and prayer grounds. Our correspondent Kelvin Obeten reports.
Eid al-Kabir, also known as Eid al-Adha, begins with a sunnah prayer. Despite early morning showers, Muslim faithful in Lagos turned out at different prayer grounds across the state for the Eid al-Adha prayers.
Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar.
Eid al-Kabir honors the willingness of Prophet Ibrahim to sacrifice his son as an act of submission to God's command. Lessons of Eid al-Kabir border on obedience and self-sacrifice.
What we are taking away from today's celebration is obedience to Almighty Allah, and also to ensure that we stick to the basic Islamic principle, which of course number one is to love our neighbors as ourselves, even if they are non-Muslims.
My message to Nigeria is to use this period and all period as a period of peace, nation building, and for prosperity.
The main essence of today's message, this celebration, is steadfastness and patience. We celebrate this day, which we call Eid al-Adha or Eid al-Kabir, with this significant message. And it's only those that Almighty Allah has granted the mercy and the peace of mind and purpose that will do this.
At the State House praying ground, Dudan Barracks, prominent personalities in Lagos State, including the Deputy Governor, Mrs. Oluranti Adebule, former Governor of Lagos State, Mr. Babatunde Fashola, and the national leader of the All Progressives Congress, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, converged to observe the festival.
And elated in the fact that Allah has given us the grace to witness this day. And I want to congratulate all Muslims, particularly Lagosians, for witnessing this day. And I pray that Allah will continue to bless each and every one of us. It's a grace that Allah has given us to witness this day, and we cherish it and we appreciate it.
The early morning prayers were followed by slaughtering of rams, symbolizing sacrifice and obedience. The meat from the slaughtered ram is also expected to be distributed among the needy and non-Muslim neighbors. The lessons from Eid al-Kabir should remind all Nigerians that individual sacrifice is an indispensable element for actualizing unity and peace. Kelvin Obeten, Channels Television News.
Now, since President Buhari assumed office on May the 29th this year, he made it clear that he'll tackle corruption headlong. And to actualize this, he gave a directive that all revenue due to the government and its agencies must be paid into the Treasury single account. Well, that directive is being enforced, and the CBN has accordingly designated an account for that purpose. The ripple effect of this is that all deposits by ministries and agencies have been moved from the banks. The implication is that there is limited cash flow for bank operations. It's against this backdrop that the CBN governor made a forecast of a recession by 2016. Joining me now on the news at 10 to look at this is the president of the Bank Customers Association of Nigeria, Dr. Uju Ogubonka. Thank you so much for joining us on the news at 10.
Thank you.
How is all of this affecting daily bank transactions? What are you hearing? What feedback do you have from your colleagues?
Thank you very much. Well thought out policy, but certainly with unintended, consequences that might affect the economy negatively. For instance, we are beginning to witness situations where banks are certainly going to have a squeeze in liquidity. And also, once there is liquidity squeeze within the banking system, it's going to affect credit delivery services of banks to their customers. And that's where our members come on board. Many of our members rely on bank credit to support their businesses and other activities. And so prices, cost of funds, are likely going to be jacked up, because when there is liquidity squeeze, then the banks will have to source for money, perhaps at a very high cost. And in doing so, they have to deliver such services to their customers also at a higher premium. And that will affect the customers, affect consumers, and affect even the individual households in various forms.
What is that going to do to smaller businesses? Because already they accused banks of lending to the big boys and big customers, etc. What is going to happen to businesses like that?
Yeah, for SMEs, that's a small and medium enterprises, it's certainly going to affect them negatively. Because if you consider the fact that even before this time, there were issues about lending money to small-scale businesses, apparently because of the high risks involved. Now that we even have squeeze in credit, they are going to be the first to have problems with getting credit at all. And if that happens, then it affects the small-scale businesses, affect their staff, affect the economy, because these small-scale businesses also contribute a larger proportion to the gross domestic product. And that will ultimately dovetail into the general GDP of our country.
We understand that some of your colleagues have already been laid off, seeing as there are no accounts for them to run. That must be tough. How are you trying to bridge that gap, and what are you doing to stop that?
Well, banks and other institutions that are affected, including businesses that actually rely on credit to move their businesses forward, are reconsidering, the kind of portfolio of staff that they are going to have in view of this new directive. Apparently, because the capacity utilization would come down unless they are able to access enough credit to move their businesses forward. Already, some banks have laid off some staff because perhaps they don't have enough to engage them. And once this is happening at the banking level, it will dovetail to the real sector. The real sector may not have enough money to deal with their businesses to the full capacity. And we all know in this country that even before this time, most of these organizations were not operating at full level. Some of them were operating at 40-something%, 50%, and so on. So if they don't now have money to move their businesses forward, what that will mean is that they have to cut costs. And in cutting costs, staffing will be one of the first areas they have to look at.
Let's look at some of the reasons that the whole TSA idea came up in the first place, and increased transparency, and the whole idea was for us to be able to know how money is moving out, how money is coming in. Would you say that the gains of it, how do I want to put it now? Would you say that it is not, the gains of it are not worth the trouble that it's causing in the sector already?
No, like I said at the beginning, it's a good thought-out policy. But I think the implementation is what we probably need to reconsider. And I believe that by the time government takes stock, evaluates what is happening in the economy, they are likely going to review the way and manner is currently being operated. For instance, yes, you can have all the money, revenues of government in central bank. After all, central bank is the bank for government anyway. But the operational funds for DMAs could be at the commercial banks. And in that case, you have a handshake between revenue and expenditure, and then the economy would not suffer these adverse consequences that some we have already mentioned. So I would want to see a situation where the government would be responsive and sensitive to the implications and impact of this current policy, and be in a position to say, hi, let's take another view at it and see how we can fine-tune it so that it will serve the intended purposes without harming the economy in one form or the other.
How would you have expected them to, do you expect them to stagger? What would you have expected them to do instead of this one fell swoop in which they have done it? Looking at the bank customers now, for instance.
Yeah, sometimes, you can stagger some of implementation of this, phase on phases. For instance, instead of taking away 1.something trillion from the banking system at once, we could have staggered them, say, in on quarterly basis, for instance, so that banks would take their time to re-strategize, get out of the system, perhaps go into more aggressive marketing to get money from the unbanked sectors of the economy to shore up their positions. Now, if you staggered it, say, for example, 1 year or 1.5 years, that would have given banks the opportunity to do that, and then the consequences that we are going to witness, or we may witness, may not have been there after all. The second one is that even the banks themselves could have been given notice to say, look, this could happen within a period of time, and then they can go ahead, perhaps get more capital for their businesses, go out and get more money for themselves, and then things would go on perhaps better than we are going to witness very shortly.
All right, President of the Bank Customers Association of Nigeria, thanks you so much for joining us on the News at 10 tonight.
Thank you very much.
Now, when the News at 10 returns, our big story takes a look at electricity generation and supply in Nigeria. Join us again.